So really great interface, but because they've narrowed the scope so much on what they're going to actually try to accomplish. Well, of course, if I was building a simple calendar interface, it'd look pretty hot right now too. But if I'm trying to build one that does everything, it's more complicated.
Which brings me to another point. And it actually, I think it brings in a few subjects at the same time. You've got privacy of information, what you're willing to share with other people, and so on. You've got, if you look at the Notes calendar, you look at Outlook calendar, you look at, all these different calendars. You take out the logo, they pretty much all look the same, a 7-day grid, or depending on the visualization, on a day or a week or whatever. Yeah. Pretty much the look is the same. Do you think, and that grid view, before people had day planners, so it wasn't really a grid view. It was day planners, and you had Monday through, but then when we went on the PC, we started to have the grid view, and it hasn't really evolved.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to evolve? Do you think people are willing to evolve? And if so, how do you think that will evolve?
Well, there's a lot of PC metaphors that are still stuck in some past experience, and I often think it's kind of one of the spare daydreaming things that I sit there and think about. If we didn't have this installed base, what would we do differently? Right? You can do that about anything. My favorite one is if we didn't have stoplights today, red, yellow, green, simple lights on a pole. What would, in 2010, if you had a bunch of traffic engineers try to come up with a traffic control signal for an intersection, would they come up with 3 little lights on a post? No way. So, but that's what we have, right? That's what we have in 2010. We're stuck with it because you're never going to teach the whole world some different metaphor, right? And even in 2010, the metaphor of a folder within your mail or the icon to save in most applications still looks like a floppy disk. And I haven't seen a physical floppy disk in at least 10 years, right? So we get stuck in these metaphors of the past because of the curse of the installed base. And that's no offense to anybody as an end user, but when you've trained millions of people to do something, teaching them to do it a different way is really a challenge. So again, as slick as an iPad or a BlackBerry or whatever is today in 2010, they've still stuck with the metaphors that computing industry invented 10 or 20 years ago. It will take some major inflection activity to get people comfortable doing it some other way. And I think activity-based may be the way to do that, but we've been talking about that now.
What do you mean by activity-based?
So I'm more focused on this project and this thing that I want to work on than some time slot and some email that somebody sent me. But we've been talking about that concept within our research team for 6 years now. Some of it's in our product today, but we still can't get to a metaphor that's different. It still ties to the existing tools and systems. It could be that there's a better way out there, and our researchers have some really good ideas, but even when I see them do new research projects, they still start with a grid and calendaring. So I think that it's going to be some major inflection event. Maybe it's around location services, maybe it's around some cloud thing that we don't know of yet.
Do you think the mobile can play a role in there?
I think mobile's probably the key there, right? Because mobile is where the innovation's happening right now. Faster than I can write software, I can see mobile devices with 6-month lifespan coming out with new interfaces and new capabilities. So if that's the place where it will happen, consumer adoption happens there as well. And that's the thing driving a lot of IT is the end user can go buy their own mobile device in most companies. Right? So I can choose to adopt an iPhone, I can choose to adopt a BlackBerry, I can choose to adopt a Nokia. Nobody's choosing to adopt Windows Mobile, but anyway, sorry. But as an end user, if I'm making that choice, I'm making that choice based on, Android has these really great features, but by the way, Android doesn't have a calendar that's built into the operating system yet. And even in Froyo 2.2, they have some sort of vague day-at-a-glance thing and personal calendar, but they don't have an enterprise calendar function built in. So now it's up to us as a vendor to go fill that hole, right? So every device is doing things different, and now that more of them have an app store model where a user can put their own stuff on there, users will adopt what makes sense to them. I don't like the way that Twitter looks, so I'll go to Flipbook. I'm not really excited about, the Facebook app as it's installed. I'm going to go to some different UI, right? I could use the browser for half these things, but the apps have actually made it much more interesting or useful. Right? The New York Times publishes a perfectly good website, but they have an app on there that takes that website and formats it specifically for the iPad, so I'm using that. Right? So I think that users will prod it along, but I don't know what the thing is that they're going to latch onto.
Have you tried Flipboard, by the way?
Yeah, I'm using it.
What do you think about it?
I think it's great.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same information that we're used to seeing every day. It's just displayed differently, and people are like, "Oh, I never knew you had that information."
Well, the thing that they did that's smart is they go one level down on the links.
Yeah.
Right? Because half those links that you see in a Twitter stream, you'd probably never click on, but all of a sudden you're reading the article or the summary of the article and you go, oh, that's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. So this morning I learned some guy in Switzerland got a speeding ticket for $1 million based on driving his Mercedes around at 200 miles an hour somewhere in Switzerland. And the fine system in Switzerland is based on the income of the person who got stopped and all sorts of things. So this guy was 600,000 pounds, so about $1 million US, speeding ticket. And it was on my Twitter stream, and it was on Facebook, and it was on TechCrunch. So all of them came together in Flipboard. So
that's interesting. Yeah, so I really think that there's ways that we're used to our calendar grid, and that's gonna change.
Yeah.
Because it's ingrained in everybody, but I do think that there's place for innovation on visualization, and it depends on what you like. For example, like the ability you talked about, the ability to suggest stuff to do. You won't have that pop up from a square in your calendar.
Right.
There's got to be a different way of visualizing what you could be doing during that time, and then how does that link back into the grid, and how do you get out of it? Or, you travel a lot, right? And there's if I'm in the office, the grid works for me. But if I'm traveling, I would like to see my day in a totally different format, for example, where I want to see my itinerary. This is where you're going to be going. This is, and these are the routes you're going to have to take, and this is the time that you have to estimate. So, by the way, don't book a meeting during that, or you can do only a phone call or whatever. Mm-hmm. Your calendar should be intelligent for you, right?
Yeah, and we're starting to take steps in that direction.
Yeah.
But it really does all have to come together, and overlays don't do that yet. They're not intelligent enough to look at each other. So it's still, I have that meeting from 1 to 2, and then I need a drive time, and then I need this and a bio break, and how are we going to schedule those in there? Right? Yeah.
So even though you work like at IBM, which is considered the big blue, and you're kind of a forward-facing guy where you've got, well, not just forward-facing, but you do stuff that not the typical large organization people do. Like you're on Foursquare, you're on Twitter, you have TripIt, you mentioned, and then so on, and you've got all these different sources of data and so on that's happening. So how do you see all this aggregating, and is there like where do you see it also aggregate?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and not because it's you sitting here, but the calendar is really the aggregation point for most of that, right? Because not that Foursquare has an interface to that yet, but they'll figure it out. Or whether it's we move to some other location service, Gowalla or Facebook says they're going to do one now, or whatever it's going to be. But it's still event-driven in some way, shape, or form. So I won't say meeting-driven. That would be a sort of internal thought. But event-driven that, okay, today there's a launch of Lotus Live. So what's going to happen? I've got internal conference call on it. I've got an external conference call on it. I want to be monitoring what the analysts and press are saying about it. How is all that going to come together and make a productive day for me? And by the way, factor into that my daughter's bus will arrive home at 4:15, and she needs to be at the friend's house by 5, and the baby needs to go down at 7. Right? So, time still is at its essence the thing that drives human behavior.
Absolutely.
Sun goes down, sun comes up, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems like the calendar is probably the most logical place to bring together all the things going on in the world. And I'm, again, not just saying that for the cameras, right?
No.
But that is a vision that I think everybody's kind of driving towards. Every one of those other apps that you mentioned has a time-driven element to it. Foursquare wants to know, 2 hours ago, here's where your other friends checked in, or 10 minutes ago, somebody else you don't know checked in the same place you're in, right? So it's addressing time in 2 dimensions. TripIt is completely date-driven, right? Twitter, your Twitter stream, you almost never go back more than an hour or two when you sit down and go look at Twitter, because anything older than that doesn't really matter, right? Twitter doesn't have a metaphor. Some of the apps do, but Twitter in and of itself doesn't think of a metaphor that says, here's the latest update from everybody you follow. It's completely timeline driven. So time is really driving everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know if you read it or you saw it. I was in an interview last week or 2 weeks ago, I forget. And finally, the guy still hasn't put. It was a podcast, and he still hasn't posted it. But he wrote a blog post about what he had found interesting, and he was like, he wasn't expecting my comments on how I see the role of the calendar in the future. Because at the end of the day, we built a scheduling service, right? And to me, that was the first step. Actually, the first step was to be able to aggregate a lot of data. And so that's why we made sure that we could work with all the major calendars. And we actually on Monday we're announcing that you can bring in your trip hit, you can bring in your different elements that you've got. So you start aggregating all this, whether it's personal, whether it's work. And then it was, okay, well, what's the biggest pain that we're hearing from people is it's scheduling, right? They need to find a better way to schedule meetings because they're wasting a shitload of time. And that's used to tell someone, we'll solve your scheduling pain. You're like, please, help me, right? And so that was an interesting step. But then, at the end of the day, we realized as well that a calendar is kind of the anchor point for all these different parts, right? And if you look at it, there's all this talk about Facebook and your social graph and so on. But you know what? I'm connected on Facebook to people that I went to high school with, and seriously, I haven't seen them in 15, 20 years.
Right.
I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a shitload of time. And you know what? I really have no connection, but they're part of my social graph.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about it, the calendar is the perfect representation of your real social graph. For a business person, because not everybody uses a calendar. So, but if you look at it, the normal business professional, they're using their calendar for both, as you mentioned, for their personal and their work life. So your calendar knows who are the people you're actually meeting, how much time you're spending with these people. It knows where you're going, what you're doing, how much time you're spending on traveling, and so on. So your calendar has so much information. And so by having this aggregation of data, and if you add in the location-based services and so on, you start having this really data-driven place where now you can start giving recommendations to people, a bit like your Project Vulcan, right? You can start giving recommendations. And it was one of the first time the guy had thought about it this way. It's like, dude, there's a lot more in the calendar than what meets the eye today, because people are used to, this is what I'm doing today, and it doesn't do anything else for me. But in reality, there's so much data there, and it's structured in what you need to be doing. When you look at Foursquare, it's telling you where the person is today, at this moment. Well, it's not really useful for the advertisers or for the location, because maybe the bar next door tells you, there's a $10 off beer now, but you don't care about it. You're sitting here. It's like you already ordered your beer. You're not gonna go somewhere else, right? So it's kind of, but your calendar knows that. Let's say I was coming to Chicago. The first spot, even before my wife, that knew where I was going was my calendar. Right? Because I had put it in my calendar. And then now that I said, okay, Thursday I'm coming to meet Ed, then it's like, okay, I need a flight. Okay, this time I won't need a rental car, but then there's other things that you may need, right? And so your calendar is the first spot for it, and so there's just natural synergies that what needs to get done. And it knows your behavior, it knows what your likes and your dislikes, and it also knows who you're interacting with and what their likes and dislikes are. Yeah. So to me, there's a lot of information there, right? And so, which I think is totally in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, the specials on Foursquare thing is fascinating to me. And I was talking to T.A. McCann last week.
Yeah.
He was in town.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, we actually initially started to talk about it in the context of Groupon. Some people at Groupon, they're apparently Chicago-based.
Are they?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
I don't know them. I feel like I should, but and I probably have 6 connections to them. I just haven't gone and looked for it.